So welcome to the seventh in a series of webinars on the Standardized Program Evaluation Protocol, otherwise known as SPEP. The SPEP is designed to be a sustainable, practical program evaluation tool for residential and community-based juvenile justice programs and serves as a driver for juvenile justice reform and reinvestment initiatives. SPEP has been underway in Pennsylvania for over a year, and today's webinar will take a look back at our experiences and accomplishments, as well as some emerging themes over the past year. My name is Heather Perry, and I'm a Juvenile Justice System Improvement Specialist with the Evidence-Based Prevention and Intervention Support Center, otherwise known as the EPIS Center, and we're a center that's funded by the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency and the Department of Public Welfare to provide training and technical assistance to evidence-based programs and coalitions in the field, as well as support juvenile justice system improvement across Pennsylvania. We're a project of the Prevention Research Center, which is housed in the College of Health and Human Development here at the Pennsylvania State University. I'm very pleased to have Jeff Gregro presenting with me again. Jeff is a Berks County Deputy Chief Juvenile Probation Officer. Berks County was the initial pilot county to roll the process of SPEP out in Pennsylvania. So we kid around with Jeff saying he's the spirit of SPEP or the king SPEPper, but in all seriousness, Jeff has truly been a mentor and a teacher and a trainer to numerous folks, including myself, across Pennsylvania. Among many responsibilities, Jeff is also the co-chair of the SPEP Advisory Committee Work Group, and he's extremely knowledgeable on many, many levels. So welcome, Jeff. Well, let me start with a quick overview of what we'll be covering, and then we'll begin. So I'll start with the overall approach that we've taken with the implementation of SPEP in Pennsylvania, and then we'll review some lessons that we've learned during the SPEP rollout. Jeff will talk about some of the preliminary and emerging themes. I'll review the process, performance improvement, and then we'll wrap up, leaving a lot of time for questions and answers at the end. Please note that we've provided you with a number of resources that can be directly linked to by clicking on them at the bottom left of your screen. Please feel free to type in your questions into the Q&A chat box at any time, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a partnership between probation, juvenile court, and service providers with a goal of quality improvement informed by meta-analytic research that's aimed specifically at reducing recidivism. The idea here is for Pennsylvania to develop expertise in SPEP for sustainability and training purposes. We need to build a community of practice to increase the knowledge of SPEP. The representative juvenile justice, juvenile probation officers, technical assistance providers, which include staff from Vanderbilt University's Peabody Institute, juvenile justice consultants or epicenter staff, service providers, and state policymakers. Learning community conference calls and technical assistance calls occur weekly to discuss issues in the field. Quarterly learning community meetings occur where issues and resources are discussed and training is offered as well. Shadowing or observing the SPEP process has been an important component of SPEP training, and it would be extremely difficult to SPEP after only receiving the classroom training. So the shadowing that we've done throughout Pennsylvania has really been beneficial to, I would say, every one of us. Communication is extremely important throughout all phases of the process. We've tried to establish common language so the messages that we're sending remain clear and concise. For example, we want less of a focus on the score and more of a focus on performance improvement, and that's been consistent throughout everyone's message. Positive, consistent messaging has been accomplished through the rollout coordination with the Juvenile Justice System Enhancement Strategy leadership, or the JJSES leadership, as well as the state-level advisory group. These groups have taken some significant time to develop these rollout strategies, so they make sense and they're received well by stakeholders. If you've attended any of our webinars or presentations, then you've seen this symbol. It shows how we reinforce that SPEP is a partnership and a coordination of leadership. The hope is that this will allow for buy-in for SPEP, and it will inform current and future stakeholders and address stakeholder concerns about the process. The SPEP life cycle is a representation of how we're continuously working to make improvements, and again, the message remains consistent. We welcome continued opportunities to present and spread the word during conferences, trainings, and various meetings throughout the state. Key leader orientations and community kickoff events for probation and providers within each pilot county are also ways to enhance communication strategies. And we educate and provide updates on the SPEP pilot project through social media outreach, newsletters, and of course our webinars. So Pennsylvania's approach to piloting SPEP in the 5 counties has provided us the opportunity to do a little preliminary data collection. Just going to discuss a little bit more of the specifics later, but one thing that we're finding is that there's a huge demand for drug and alcohol information as it relates to SPEP. We already have several providers that are eagerly awaiting the completion of the research so that we can come into their facilities and complete SPEP. So what's working? In addition to program improvement, we know that the providers and probation are generally happy with the process. Probation inevitably knows or learns more about the services that they're offering their youth, and the providers feel more invested in the process as well. We're finding that we need to continue to test and refine SPEP and the processes for practicality, usability, alignment between method and messages. We're all trying to figure out the challenges and the extra pieces that need to be put into place. Part of the approach is to ask the audience to fill out evaluations on the work that we're doing there. SPEP evaluations of the SPEP trainings, provider interviews, and webinars are done to determine the value of the content and to determine if there's a collaborative tone. This is the results of the evaluations that we've done at the kickoff meetings. That we've held 5 kickoff meetings in all 5 counties, and often this is the meeting in which SPEP is introduced to the stakeholder. As you can see here by the summary of evaluations, they indicate that this was a way to meaningfully increase their knowledge and understanding of SPEP. Each of the kickoff meetings were different in that varying information was presented, but the messaging continuously remains the same and consistent. We've completed many interviews, and what's important to note in this slide is that the folks that we're interviewing don't feel as though the interviews are like an audit. So the 4th question down there in the center, you'll see that it looks like we're scoring low, but in reality it's reverse question, so we want to actually show a low score in that piece there. Another positive comment is that providers feel that they were given helpful materials to prepare for the interview process. So if you haven't been through the SPEP process yet, you don't have to feel like you're going into the process blind. We do offer a lot of guidance and assistance prior to the visit. And despite the audio challenges that we've had today as well as previously, the feedback is generally positive. Most folks that view the webinars rate them as a means to increase their knowledge of SPEP. So just going to talk a little bit about the resources that we have received and the resources that we've created for SPEP, as well as some of the things that we have coming down the pipeline.
So Heather, can you hear me all right? I'm just hoping everyone can hear me all right. I've had some major technical challenges this morning, so I only was able to get on the webinar about 2 minutes before 11, so I'm hoping this is coming through okay for everybody. I heard you gave me a great introduction, and I greatly appreciate that. I know I had a lot to add to those initial slides that I wasn't able to because my audio just started working like about 5 minutes ago. But I think from the beginning of this, and for Berks County, we are now 3 years into this process. Our initial meeting regarding the SPEP was in Georgetown in August of 2011. So 3 years in, what I'm hearing from providers and probation offices still around the state is the message continues to be this is a shared responsibility. Everyone's sharing in the program improvement plan, and it really continues to be a collaboration. So I'm glad that that message is still being carried forward by everyone now that's involved. What you're seeing on the screen now, and I'm just going to go over some of the resources that have been developed by the Epicenter, the learning community as a whole, which I think is just a fabulous idea and something unique to Pennsylvania, and then the SPEP Advisory Committee that looks at all the resources and which ones we look to develop further and pass along to other jurisdictions in the state. But what you see now on the screen is what I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and it's just the basic SPEP scoring sheet. And all this information on the resources is also available on the Epicenter website. But the score sheet is really what the SPEPers use after we gather all the information. And you can see the areas that we're looking at. So we're identifying the service types, the quality of service delivery, the amount of service, which is really the dosage, the number of weeks a child receives the service, and the number of contact hours during that week, and then the risk level. And the risk level is broken out into two parts. This form actually underwent a recalibration a few years ago. The initial form that we were working with in Berks did not look like this, so the form was recalibrated. Kind of slowed the effort a little bit in the beginning. I know we were doing numerous presentations in the beginning about SPEP coming, but we had to slow down a little bit just due to the recalibration of the instrument. As you see at the bottom, the total SPEP score being 100. As we know, not every program is able to achieve 100 points. That's really based on the type of service, the primary service identified. So when you look at a Group 5 service, that would be CBT. That's the only one really eligible for 100 as a maximum. So this is the SPEP score sheet. The next is something that we initially developed here in Berks County, and the Epicenter has just taken this to the next degree and really fine-tuned it and really made it a lot more specific and user-friendly by providers and probation offices. We try to provide, well, we don't try to provide, we provide the SPEP pre-visit checklist to providers a few weeks prior to the visit. There are a lot of meetings that take place, conference calls prior to a SPEP visit with a provider, but the pre-visit checklist is one of the resources that was developed to really enable us, once we get to a provider, to hit the ground running with the SPEP process. It really helps with the unpacking process, and that's in the service type area. So what we do is we look at program descriptions and daily schedules, any kind of manuals that a provider has for their service, and we try to get those ahead of time so we can look at them. So once we meet with the provider, we're ready with questions. I think the daily schedule is really important because it helps us break down, especially in a residential program, during the period of time the kids are there with the provider during the day, what are they receiving and when are they receiving it and for how long are they receiving it. So the SPEP pre-visit checklist, like I said, really enables us to hit the ground running when we get there. Service quality is really the quality measures piece of the SPEP, and there's the 4 areas on the screen that we look at when we do the quality measures interview. So it enables the provider to gather all that information ahead of time, have maybe some staff to talk to ahead of time, and just some of the things we're looking at. And then the amount of service, which is the dosage and the risk level, is really one of the most important pieces of the SPEP. This isn't only for the provider. I want to stress this is also for the probation office too. I know in Berks County here, especially around the service amount and the risk level, we know the risk level of the kids. We're sharing the YLS with the provider. We have that information readily available. And then when kids start a service, whether it's an in-home service or a residential service, obviously, we're keeping data on when they started that program and when they completed the program or finished it or had to leave for whatever reason. So these are just two of the resources that we have. The next resource that you're looking at, and these are the feedback reports that get spent. Heather talked a little bit about the data collection piece that we have. So when we go out and do a SPEP with a provider, we want to get feedback on the process itself. Did it feel like an audit? Was it beneficial to them? Was it what they expect it to be. And then we really use this information on this survey at the end of the SPEP process to decide how to fine-tune our approach to doing SPEP. I think Heather pointed out something that was important, and it's always been stressed from the beginning with us, even when we started the project, that this is not an audit and we don't want to make it be an audit, and if a provider's feeling they're being audited, we want to do something to change that approach. So this is something that was developed by the Epicenter to enable us to collect the data and the outcomes on our approach to doing the SPEP with providers, to make it as friendly and collaborative as possible. The next one is just some information we keep on a provider. Obviously, you can read the screen on there, but once we do the interview, it's who we're interviewing, the type of service identified, where was the SPEP completed, what was the description. So this is just more of the forms that we fill out. A lot of data collection around this. We did not even have close to the magnitude of these forms until the Epicenter got involved with this project. So I think that having full-time SPEPers through the Epicenter and having people able to have this data collection and analyzation background really has helped move the process forward, really has helped us fine-tune our approach. Data collection, this is a data collection checklist, something that we ask for programs to do. It really helps with the dosage and risk level. So when we reach out to a provider and we identify the cohort that we're going to be looking at, the provider, especially in the residential world, is able to fill in an identifier for the child, obviously the county, but we really want to look at the number of weeks of service that the juvenile received during that primary service. And the number of hours that they receive during those weeks. And obviously the YLS is very important. We want to be targeting the right kids for the right programs and keeping them in that program for the right amount of time. And I think it's been encouraging lately, the amount of YLS assessments that are being shared with providers that we're seeing. We still have a ways to go in this area, but it is improving. We're hearing a lot of positive things from providers, that the percentages of referrals that they're getting do include the YLS, and that's been increasing dramatically over the last couple of years. So this just helps with data collection. It helps with streamlining the process of scoring the dosage and risk area level of the SPEP. Another resource developed by the Epicenter, and like I said, these forms, most of these forms, if not all of them, are available on the Epicenter website. But the service classification fact sheets are just a general overview of the services. So there are 3 different service type approaches with the SPEP. There are restorative services, counseling services, and skill building approaches. And in those 3 approaches, there are 14 primary service types. So what the Epicenter has done is they have broken down those primary service types, included a general description of what the service is, how it is categorized, and then the dosage, which is very important, the number of weeks, the target number of weeks, and the target number of hours. So I think this is a very important sheet that they have put together, enables providers to go on the website, and if they do think that they have a mentoring program as part of their service, or if they're doing individual counseling or group counseling with youth, they can look at the targets and know that that's how they should be shaping their programs. And finally, more to come, more resources to come through the learning community and through the SPEP advisory group. We are always looking to develop more tools for a better understanding of SPEP, the process, the research behind it, and then the provider and probation office shared buy-in. So some of the things that we're working on right now are a manual for probation officers and providers that just gives that general overview and understanding of SPEP. One-page bench cards, not necessarily for the bench in court, but it can be used that way, but just one-page fact sheets that are being developed, similar to the fact sheets and bench cards that were developed for the YLS. Just explains the research behind the SPEP, something easily that someone could take a look at and get a general understanding of what SPEP is about. Documents and training videos, which will be very interesting. I know we've taped a lot of our trainings that we had, so that's been helpful for new SPEPers, and when we go down to look to train a new group of people on SPEP, we can use the training videos and checklists. The residential facilities has really been a different animal, so to speak, something that we really couldn't anticipate how much more cumbersome the SPEP process for residential facilities were going to be compared to the community-based facilities. So we really have to learn to gather that information a little more efficiently and how to streamline that process, but that's something being developed right now. Evidence-based fact sheets, we know that there are a lot of blueprint and motto and brand name programs that do have sufficient research behind them, and are not fact sheets currently created for them, so that's something that's in development for programs such as an MST or FFT, grocery replacement training. So now we're developing fact sheets similar to the ones you saw on the previous slide. And then we did see some examples of the probation and provider partnership evaluations.
Okay, so what we're noticing in the field, SPEP is definitely not broad enough to capture every service that's being delivered. As Vanderbilt continues to gather data, it could grow into being an all-encompassing of all service types, but at this point, providers feel that what we're doing is beneficial because the principles of SPEP can be taken and applied across all services, even if they're not SPEPable. We're finding that many of the recommendations that we're making regarding one service applies to many or sometimes all services within that program. As I've already mentioned, there's a strong need and desire for drug and alcohol SPEPs. One of the things that we've noticed is that there's really no simple way to do a SPEP, and it takes a lot of time with qualitative interviews. We're finding that each and every service provider, regardless of the service being offered, is absolutely unique. And after analyzing and conceptualizing what programs are intended to do, we know that there are truly no cookie-cutter programs. What we're noticing with regard to residential versus community-based programs, we know that residential facilities are pleasantly challenging, as Jeff mentioned the other day. They're a huge undertaking to unpack in SPEP. We have to break the programs down or unpack in order to understand their complexities. And this process is very time-consuming, and I think that none of us realized at the onset of this process that it would be such a huge undertaking for some of these huge residential facilities. And there's no standard as far as what we as probation and epicenter folks can do to help the provider prepare for the process. We tailor each SPEP to suit the needs of every provider. So if you're someone that is fairly knowledgeable on the SPEP process and you don't feel the need to have a lot of technical assistance before, during, and after the SPEP process, then we're not going to force it on you. Whereas if you really feel that you need the technical assistance, then we'll absolutely be there and help you and guide you and do whatever we can to make the process smooth for you. We had a webinar on data collection where we mentioned the challenges associated with the data collection. And often this is magnetized when it's a residential facility because we absolutely need risk scores, and not all probation offices actually do the YLSs or may not provide them to the provider at this point. And sometimes, with these residential as well as community-based facilities, it's often difficult to track duration and dosage for each of the services that the youth is participating in. And I'm not saying again that these issues don't exist in community-based services. However, they do seem to be more prominent in residentials, where you actually have to kind of track the time for a youth for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So as Jeff discussed, the 14 therapeutic services that we can SPEP, this is a listing here of those services. And as I mentioned earlier, a SPEPable service is a service that's defined as a service or program that is delivered to a juvenile offender and can be identified through the SPEP classification process as an example of a type of service program to be effective for reducing recidivism. It must be a therapeutic service, which means it must facilitate constructive, internalized, and sustained changes in behavior. And there must be sufficient evidence supporting its effectiveness. Examples, again, here are listed that are SPEPable. So equine therapy can be a wonderfully therapeutic program. However, currently there's not enough research to support its effectiveness. So it's not, at this time, a SPEPable service. So there is a difference between a SPEPable service and a SCOREable service. Just because something is SPEPable doesn't necessarily make it SCOREable. A SCOREable service must first and foremost be SPEPable. So it must be one of those 14, fall under one of those 14 service categories that were listed on the previous slide. The cohort must include 10 or more youth. A quality of service delivery must have been completed over the previous year. Dosage information must be available on all youth in the cohort. And we must have valid YLS or risk scores available for at least 80% of the cohort. So before we go on to emerging themes, we're going to take a break for questions and answers. We have more content planned to present, and we'll come back to it if the time allows.
Hi, Heather. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Well, I'm asking a question for somebody. So I was visiting a provider yesterday, taking a tour of the programs that they had to offer, and one of the questions I got from that provider was, I asked them about the SPEP process and if they were interested. It was a residential program, and the question to me was, we might not be ready for our entire program to go through the SPEP process, but if we have a primary service as part of that program that we like SPEPed, unpacked, and SPEP, is that something that we'd be able to do for them? I know we've been reaching out. We have, and I don't know if I'm going through into the emerging themes piece a little bit here, but I know we have been through the SPEP process and are currently in the SPEP process with 5 residential providers, and I know that we are looking a little bit to venture out into another residential provider soon. And I think that just to answer that question a little bit, that is something I think that we would consider. I think we'd want to take on an entire program first and unpack it, but if there is someone that does have a primary service that we could help them identify and put through the SPEP process, that's something by all means we take a look at. Obviously, I'd want to bring this before the advisory group to see if that's a direction we want to go consistently, but that is something we consider.
And we don't have any other questions listed at this time in the chat box, so we're going to go ahead on, and Jeff is going to talk about the emerging themes and some of the things that we've found thus far.
So emerging themes, and the webinar is called A Year in Review, so I'm sure people are interested to know how many programs have been visited and how many are involved with the SPEP process or have been scored. So this is just a little update. Thus far, as people know, there are 5 pilot counties involved with this now and have been scoring their programs for a little over a year now. The initial additional SPEPers were trained last July. So since that time, 28 programs have been fully scored, so they have been through the process and they have received a recidivism score on their program, and then there is the range from 37 up to 100. There are currently, though, over 60 services that are at some process with SPEP. So while 28 have been fully scored, there are over 60 primary services right now that are in the process of and going toward or working toward being fully scored. Most of the services, thankfully and encouragingly, have scored above 50. And as we know from the research, the cut point that we're looking for is 50. Those programs scoring 50 and above have really shown to have a larger effect on reducing recidivism. So we're very encouraged by the fact that 71% of the programs have scored above that initial baseline, which is very encouraging. The middle 2 areas with staff training, supervision, and protocols in response to drift are part of the quality measures piece. So while most services that went through the SPEP process have scored well on staff training and supervision. Most need improvement with written protocols or manuals for their service. And then how do they respond if the service isn't being delivered as per the manual? So that would be the response to drift area. So those are things that we look at in the program improvement plan with programs and how we can address those areas. And then a few services meet dosage and duration standards. I think this is something maybe that was expected a little bit and something we saw in Berks County because it really, when we developed these services, we didn't really know what the optimal dosage was, the number of weeks or the contact hours in their service. So when you're developing programs, we weren't aware of what the research said. So that is something, while few services meet the dosage and duration standards, something I think that we're taking a look at fixing with providers and probation officers. That especially is a shared responsibility area in that probation officers understand and the courts understand that if a juvenile is in a program and it's a mentoring program, they really should be in that program for 26 weeks and for 78 contact hours during those 26 weeks. So I think that that's a discussion that we all need to continue to have together, that when kids are receiving services, they should be in for the proper number of weeks and receive the proper number of contact hours of that service during that period of time. Some of the limitations and cautions, and the top bullet point, the data may not reflect the true state of services. Well, we really want to caution people, while those initial results on the previous slide, were wonderful and over 70% of the services were scoring over 50, they are just the services scored by those pilot counties and just a small comparison of all the services and programs available throughout the state. So we really want to caution that that's not something that is expected or we will think will continue when we score most of the programs, all the programs in the state. We're very encouraged by those initial results, but we just want to caution that those are from the pilot counties and services that we have picked to go through the SPEP process. The pilot phase has shown ongoing need for more tools and training. Obviously, that's the reason for the development of the learning community. That's the reason for the numerous presentations that we have done throughout the state to larger groups in State College, to smaller groups in their communities, to stakeholder meetings in pilot counties. So there's always need, the further and deeper we get into this, the need that we discover for more tools and training and education around SPEP. And then one thing that we're consistently hearing is for the drug and alcohol SPEP, and we know that that is something that Dr. Lipsy is currently working on. I know I hear that from a lot of providers, that when is the drug and alcohol SPEP coming out. So that is something that is on the radar and that we're expecting soon. So that's another limitation that we have. Many of the programs are case management type of programs, drug and alcohol programs, or sex offender programs. So that's something that we're waiting to hear. Once the sufficient research is gathered on those type of programs, we'll be able to proceed forward with those. Our early benefits from the pilot phase, and something that we really saw here initially in Berks County were the interviews lead to better understanding of what their programs really offer. It was really eye-opening and re-education for me and us here in Berks County of all the great work that our providers are doing for us. Our in-home community providers, many have been with us for years and have adjusted their programs to what we wanted the programs to look like. But when you sit down and go through especially that unpacking process and you hear all the great work that they're doing on a daily basis with the kids, it really not only helps us understand the programs better and what they're offering on an hourly basis, many of them, but really improves the collaboration and understanding around the great work they're doing for our kids. So I think that that's been one of the most refreshing aspects of SPEP, especially for here in Berks County, and I'm hearing it from other pilot counties as well. I mentioned earlier about the YLS risk scores being provided, and that is improving, like I said before, better service matching and treatment plans. So the probation office should be looking at not only the risk level of the kids, but then those needs. We should be referring the appropriate kids to the appropriately matched programs. So we should be utilizing that YLS to match kids to programs. We should be sharing the YLS with the providers so that they know specifically what type of services to address with the kids. We should all be continuously collaborating on that process, really the most important process. And then ongoing education of the juvenile court system. Having an understanding and educating the court that when kids are in programs, especially residential programs, one of the things that we've been working with on our residential providers here is that when they provide reports back to the court at review hearings, not only are they covering whether the juvenile is behaving and progressing through their levels, but specifically the types of programming they are receiving. So if they are in group therapy or if they are receiving ART and they are, you know, 3/4 of the way through some of that programming, we would like the providers to address that specifically in their reports and presentations to the court. You know, that Johnny is only in the 24th week of a 28-week program, or that they are in, you know, they've received 50 contact hours of this service, and we'd like them to be in to complete the program to receive 75 contact hours of the service. So that we all need to have that shared language around the services, the dosage of the services, and how far kids are along in those services. More early benefits from the pilot phase. The providers are more aware of the research. Like I said, we've done on a statewide level and on a local level a lot of education around the research that Dr. Lipsey has compiled and made it available on the Epicenter website. And I believe this is our 6th webinar. So we're trying to reach out to the mass audience as much as we can in the easiest way possible to make people aware of the research and why we're doing the SPEP. And then providers are actively planning for the SPEP and they're interested in program improvement. Something very encouraging that we've seen from the beginning that continues to this day are providers calling and volunteering for the SPEP. All providers thus far on a residential level have volunteered for the SPEP and have been asking, can we go through the process? So that's something that continues to be very encouraging of providers volunteering to go through the process. And I think on the last bullet point, it's only improved the relationship between probation and the providers, that this is a shared ownership and a shared responsibility, and we do share. It's not only a program improvement plan, but it's a system improvement plan, and we do share in that responsibility to look how we can make those suggested changes.
Okay, so another thing that we've realized while working through the process is that we're desperately in need for a formalized performance improvement process. You know, we've had about 60 services SPEPed, and we only have a handful of those that are actually have a formalized process improvement plan in place. So we're currently, you know, looking for the probation and the provider partners to address the areas identified in the feedback report as needing improvement. And we're working with the probation and the provider partners to identify the method that they want to utilize for this process. And technical assistance is available as always. And some of the things that should be included in this performance improvement plan are listed here. And I'm going to show you here in a second an example of something that some providers, the probation officers, and the folks here at Epicenter drafted. And again, this is currently in draft form, and we're working this process through as quickly as we can to get something in place. But this is actually an example of the plan that we developed as a team. And you'll note here that basic program information is listed here at the top. And essentially this top portion mimics what you see on your feedback report. So essentially you can kind of copy and paste that into this improvement plan template. And this would include the name of the provider, the service, location, the juvenile probation partners, and the date. Additionally, at the bottom here, under SPEP domains and recommendations, this would list the recommendations, and they can essentially be, again, copied and pasted directly from the feedback report. The next section here identifies goals, action steps, and then the progress update. So it's really important then to list the goals, and they can be generated or not be generated from the feedback reports. But It entails the statement articulating the goal that the team has decided to work on. And these goals should be specific, measurable, accountable, and realistic, as well as time limited. The action steps are listed underneath each goal, and these are the defined action steps necessary to complete the particular goal. We recommend that you include in this piece a lead person, and that would be someone that's going to be held accountable or be responsible for each particular goal. We ask that a target date of completion and then a date of completion be included. And again, these are just estimated times for the completion of a particular step. And underneath that, you'll see that there are pieces or sections where we list the meetings. And these are progress update meetings or progress update phone calls. And we try and generate these approximately every 3 months, but the times can be in coordination with your needs as a provider, as probation, and they are, again, flexible. And as I said, we are currently working on this, and it is a work in progress, but we hope to have something concrete soon, because we do realize that this is really, truly the next step, and it's an important step, and this is what the providers and probation staff are looking for in order to move on with this process. So that's just another piece of this with some additional examples of goals and action steps. And so that moves us back again to the Q&A piece. If you have any questions, I do see that there is one listed there. And it says, some YLS assessments that are provided are not updated prior to a student's admission to a program, particularly in the case that the youth has attended a residential program, and he was then released and committed to a community-based program. Will there be a process for the probation officers, and I'm assuming, oh, okay. Will there be a process for the probation officer to update the YLS of each youth prior to their admission to a different program instead of only once the youth is involved in a facility?
I know the probation offices do have policies around updating the YLS, especially for kids getting out of residential placement. In Berks County, we wait until a youth is 3 months out of a residential placement to update the YLS. I see where the question comes in, though, is if you have a youth stepping down from their placement into a residential program, many of them still have the YLS being high risk, and that's something that we're coming across here. But our policy here in Berks County, and I know in a lot of other counties, is to wait 3 months just to get an accurate reflection of whether the services that they received in a residential placement are carrying over. You don't want to have too much of a false environment when you do the YLS. That's why it's not done while a juvenile is still in residential placement, because they're not, for the most part, in a public school. They're not living in their home, so it's difficult to score many of the areas on there. But here in Berks County, we update the YLS 3 months after they're released from residential placement. Or maybe if a specific incident, there are some exceptions at times when you can go around the policy or go outside the policy, but ours is 3 months outside of after release from residential placement.
And I don't see at this time any additional questions, but if you have additional questions, you are certainly more than welcome to email Jeff and I, and I'm going to show our emails here in a second. Oh, thank you. So here are Jeff and my emails. You can email either one of us questions. And I also want to draw your attention here to the Epicenter website. And I would like to ask you to fill out the evaluations and before you go, and we're going to pull them up on the screen. Here it is, so you can immediately go into that evaluation and fill it out. And I'd like to thank everyone for your time and attention and your patience with our audio. It's sometimes a challenge to work with people in different offices, so that I do appreciate your patience with that piece of this. And I hope you have a great day. And I don't know if Jeff wants to say anything before we go. Jeff, go ahead.
Final comments. Thank you, Heather. First of all, I want to apologize to you, the audience, for my initial audio issues that I had here, and I'm glad I could join on. But really, final comments for me is I'm really encouraged. SPEP really has a lot of momentum now in the state of Pennsylvania. Like I said, over 60 primary services now are in the process of being fully scored. I'm encouraged by providers continuing to volunteer for the process, the buy-in and input from probation offices in providing the information needed and in making those outreaches to their providers. The pilot counties that have come on board and the way they've engaged their communities in the SPEP process. I'm encouraged by the majority of primary services thus far that have been unpacked have been in the group 3, 4, and 5 types of services, so those services that really show have the most impact on reducing recidivism. So that's something we've seen thus far, but the majority of those services that have been identified are in those groups. That's something very encouraging thus far. The scope of residential program SPEPing has really been cumbersome and continues to be a challenge, but something that we're looking to pare down that process, make it a little more streamlined, but I think that that's a challenge that we didn't anticipate through this first full year of pilot county scoring. And everyone involved continues, to message that this is a collaboration. So I think that that's something we've continued to see for the last 3 years, and as we're getting into all these services now, especially for the last year. So just my final comments, it continues to move forward, it has great momentum, and it continues to be a collaboration with providers and probation.
Alrighty, folks, so thanks for joining us, and we'll keep you posted on Webinar 8, and again, please fill out those evaluations. Keep them coming. Thanks again.